When I say we're back, we're going to do this every week. We're going to do it every Friday. We'll do it on Substack, hopefully around the same time, and have fun for 30 minutes, or at least get depressed for 30 minutes. Whatever, however you want to do this. It's great to have with us today our esteemed panelists who have been part of World Review from the very beginning. Carla Ann Robbins is now at the Council on Foreign Relations, used to be with the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, and she did publish her dissertation, just so that people know that, because it's an important element in our relationship. Bobby Gosh used to be with Bloomberg, with the Hindustan Times. He was the international editor of Time magazine. He writes about foreign policy, but much more about food and football, that is European football, and writes well. Wonderful to have you. What a week. Eternal peace in the Middle East, fat generals in the Pentagon. I mean, you can't make it up, but I guess that's where we are. Bobby, let's start with you. Monday, press conference, a 20-point plan issued, and the president walked out and he said, we did it. We've done something that nobody has been able to do in 3,000 years, which is to have peace. There's a lot of fighting going on in Gaza right now. There's a lot of bombing going on, a lot of people being killed. So if this is peace, what's war?
Exactly right. I mean, we looked at the plan sideways and straight and upside down. It's a 20-point plan. Most of the points we've seen or heard variations of this for decades. We know that this is what it'll take. There's very little objectionable about what is on the paper. The problem is that the people who have already signed on and the people we're hoping will sign on are not really the most reliable folks to shepherd this plan through its logical conclusion. First and foremost, we have not yet heard from Hamas, and the 3-day deadline passes today. I think may technically already have passed. Hamas has not yet said yes. They said they're looking at it. Bibi Netanyahu has said yes, but there's some gap between the version of the plan that he's agreed to and then the version that the other Arab states who are going to need to participate in this grand bargain, that the version that they've agreed to. President Trump is very keen on it. Suddenly, even though this goes against almost everything he has talked about before in his vision for Gaza. But the trouble is that Trump himself has not demonstrated that he has the patience, the focus to follow through on what this will take. And this will be months and years in the implementation. Secondly, Bibi Netanyahu has on many occasions come to Washington and said to various proposals, yes, but then he's gone back to Jerusalem and said, yes, but. And there is so much that is in that, yes, but. And Hamas, too, does have a history of saying maybe. So with the yes and the but and the maybe, there's far too much that is unsettled, that has not yet been sorted out. We want to be optimistic. God knows we want to be optimistic about this for the very reason you said. We want the fighting to end. We want the plight of the people in Gaza. We want them to have a break. Even if it is for a few days and hopefully for longer than that. But maybe, yes. Those are the words that are constantly in conflict with each other.
Yeah, no, I think, Bobby, you put that well. And Carla, when sort of just going back to Monday and the weekend before and sort of the week before when the president met with all the Arab leaders as well, I've heard two interpretations. One interpretation is that Trump finally put Bibi in the corner and now he's stuck and finally he'll have to do what he has to do. I'm hearing that, and interestingly enough, from a lot of my Israeli friends. And then I also hear, no. This is just Bibi saying yes, but. And as Tom Friedman says in the Middle East, don't listen to what people tell you privately or in a foreign language. Tell them what they say publicly in their own language. And in that regard, he's been pretty strong on no Palestinian state, which of course is the absolute minimum for the Arab leaders, which has all of a sudden disappeared again. So how do you see this? If you look at this as a balance of power between Bibi and Trump, which may be the wrong way to look at it, but for now, that's it seems a lot of people are looking at it that way. How do you see that balance coming out?
Yeah, I didn't feel like Bibi gave up a lot in this. The Israeli troops are not going to be out of Gaza. They're going to be in some sort of a buffer zone. The reference to a two-state solution is really, 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 you got to really look for it when you get there. There's no role for the Palestinian Authority in this. All of the things that Bibi said he didn't want basically aren't in there. And it sets up a protectorate run by Donald Trump, Bibi's great friend here. So I don't see a lot of Palestinian self-determination. If Bibi gave up anything, what he gave up was annexing the West Bank. I mean, he gave up things that were so outrageous that perhaps in the mind of the ultra right, he gave up something. But I don't see that he gave up a lot. If anything, I see this, if it were ever to go through, and I'm hugely skeptical, I think this is potentially a huge win for Bibi, and I think the win for the Gaza, people in Gaza is just the end of this terrible, terrible pounding and destruction. And can you imagine, I mean, you've seen this calculation of how many years it's going to take to just remove the rubble in that place. Is that really something that Donald Trump has the patience for or the money for? Who's going to pay for this? I think he has this image, this imagination that somehow the rich Gulfies are going to pay for it, but something that's run by Tony Blair and Donald Trump, boy, between here and there. But no, I don't see this. I don't think Bibi gave up anything.
Bobby, you have contacts in the Arab world, and you've reported from the region for many years. What do you hear from the Gulf leader, but particularly the Gulf leadership, who is, I think, as Carla rightly says, are the people who are expected both to pay for it and to provide significant military capabilities for the international stabilization force that's supposed to be in there. So they're pretty key, and they hold a lot of the keys to the implementation piece of that. What do you hear from them?
Well, there's not a great deal of comfort in the details of the plan that we know about. So the Gulf states are not particularly keen on cleaning up what they regard as Bibi Netanyahu's mess, at least until they have guarantees that he won't come back and create an even greater mess. So the idea, they want to know what a buffer zone means, what it actually means when Netanyahu promises that Israel will not go back into Gaza in some way, shape, or form. No Arab boots are going to get on the ground until those borders are very clearly defined. Those lines are very clearly drawn. When it comes to paying for the cleanup, there's absolutely no interest in doing that again until it is clear that that there are international guarantees, and not just the word of the American president, but multilateral bodies have to get involved. There's a lot of discomfort around the fact that the United Nations is playing almost no role in this. And that's a very, very big deal here. The American governments tend to understate the importance of the United Nations in solving international crises, but the Gulf states pay very careful attention to that. And the absence of the United Nations is almost as much a matter of concern as the notion that Donald Trump and Tony Blair are somehow going to be responsible actors, that they're going to bring the energy, the resources, the political will that is required to carry through on all of this. So the Arab analysts and political leaders that I am in contact with, that I speak with, are basically, they want to see far more detail. They want far more guarantees than we have seen as yet. There is pressure on Hamas. There is a lot of pressure on Hamas being put by Arab leaders to say, listen, it's time to accept, and then give your own people, the Palestinian people, a break. But that doesn't automatically mean that they'll go along with other elements of the plan.
Yeah, no, I think that's right, and you're right to point out the pressure on Hamas from the Arab leaders. They made a statement, what was it, in early August, that in fact called for the disarmament of Hamas and the removal of its governing power in Hamas, and have the Palestinians do that without Hamas. So that was a major I wouldn't say concession, it was reality, but it was important for the Arab leaders to say that. Carla, one of the people that all of a sudden showed up in this, Tony Blair's been doing this stuff for 100 years, but at least ever since he left, he left office back in 2010. The other guy who was not going to be playing any role in this administration, who didn't play a role in the campaign, is our good friend Jared Kushner. And there he is, all of a sudden, front row seat, and by all accounts, the guy who worked with Blair and Steve Witkoff, who, by the way, good to remember, the Qataris are his best friend. They rescued him when he was in financial trouble back in the 90s. This is there is a little bit of the bosses are coming back and wanting to run this place.
Well, if you recall, remember Trump's original idea for this? This was all going to be a big real estate deal for him. And I think the sort of striking thing is Blair, who, of course, had great success with Northern Ireland and never had any success as the quartet representative for the Middle East. I mean, obviously, this is his. I don't know. I don't want to call this his white whale, but certainly this is something that he wants to deal with. He does have a great knowledge of the region. Kushner, for him, it's all a real estate deal. But I think the remarkable thing is, has there been any input from any expertise from the U.S. government itself? I mean, Witkoff, where's Marco Rubio? The Secretary of State doesn't seem to be involved in this. I mean, it's the national security. Oh, that's right. It's the same guy. He's not involved in this. It is remarkable to me the people who the Trump administration relies on, the president relies on, to cut these sort of deals, to organize what should be complex things. Was there ever a principals meeting? Is there any process in this? He seems to sort of grab people off the shelf, and they all seem to always revolve around his real estate groupings of this. So while Blair has no track record of success in the Middle East, at least he's got experience in the Middle East. And Kushner has experience in the Middle East too, but it's all business experience. So that seems to be what's passing for expertise on this one.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very, very important point. I mean, the U.S. government is not operating in the way that that we have studied it, where particularly in the national security area, a lot of people get together, they hash out different views, they bring up options, and then there is a decision by the president. That process has disappeared. And as you say, it's not even clear that the Secretary of State or National Security Advisor, who happened to be the same person in this administration, was involved. was involved.
And
maybe the National Archivist was, which is also Marco Rubio. So
exactly right. We can't even go back to the archives to see what has gone before, because it's the same guy.
Yeah, right, exactly. So just to wrap it up, Bobby, if you have a crystal ball, where do you think this is going? Do you think that this is there was this sense early in the week that something had changed, something big had happened, not as big as eternal peace after 3,000 years that the president claimed, but at least the beginnings of perhaps a new process, and yet been there, done that. As you said, maybe yes, but are words we've heard for 2 years.
I think the most important thing that has come out of this week is that Donald Trump is, it would appear, and you always have to have that rider when you talk about Trump, but it would appear that he's finally clocked the idea that this is not easy. Until now, he thought that this was easy, that he would snap his fingers and this would get done. At least he seems to be acknowledging that this is not easy. And something similar happened with Ukraine and Russia, his view of Ukraine and Russia a couple of weeks ago. He's beginning to recognize that international affairs are stubborn and don't lend themselves to real estate style deal making. That's not a small thing since he's the president of the most important player in international affairs. To go from recognizing that it's not easy to then being prepared to do the hard graft that it will take, that's another great leap. And the fact that he is going into this without the kind of resources, the diplomatic resources, the intellectual resources that previous presidents have had is a matter of great concern. But it is in the Middle East, for all the decades that I've covered it, if I've learned one thing, it is you take any small mercy you can get. And this may be the smallest of small mercies, but I'll take it.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good point. You have to be in the right mood in order to understand how to go. Richard Haas wrote a book years and years ago about conflicts and negotiation, and they need to be ripe. There needs to be a ripeness, and part of that is having people who understand when it is ripe. Now, it may not be ripe yet, but the president is actually understanding that it's more difficult than he thought it was. Carla, let's shift gear, and you are a very long-standing, exceptional national security reporter. So you have a long history of figuring out what's happening in Washington and in the Pentagon and in other places. When's the last time the Secretary of War, as we now have to call him, called 800 admirals and generals and all the senior enlisted people, that is, the people who actually literally command the troops around the world, to come to one particular place, advertise it, by the way, 7 days before it happens, Quantico Marine headquarters, not headquarters. Yeah, actually, it is headquarters, isn't it? And for a major speech in which you would expect news. And what happened?
I think let's talk about what didn't happen, because we all spent all this time speculating about what was going to happen with this meeting. I mean, first of all, let's think about all the technology they have in which they could have actually communicated whatever it was that they were going to communicate. They have all this secure communications technology, or as what has now become the great cliche, but I think it's really quite compelling, they could have communicated this in an email. You had to put them all in one place. How much?
They could have put it in the post. They could have put it in the post. I mean, it wasn't like urgent.
and just how much did it just cost to get all of these people there on the eve of a shutdown? I mean, do you remember when the sequester was going on? I'm really dating myself here, but at the period of time, just during the budget fight, in which we couldn't even get people to come from West Point to go to meetings at the council in Washington because they couldn't spend the money to do this. And moving all these people to Washington on the eve of a shutdown, you had to figure something really important was going to be happening.
Just for our viewers, just to detail what it takes. So if you are a combatant commander, Indo-Pacific or in Europe or the Middle East, you don't just jump on Emirates Airline or United and have somebody carry your bag.
Icelandic
Or Icelandic Air in order to go through Iceland. Exactly. You get your 757 Boeing plane. Or 737,
and
staff and everybody else.
Communications capabilities.
Exactly, and you need to stay in a hotel, and I mean, this is not. These guys don't travel like you and I do. In fact, they travel pretty much like the Secretary of Defense and the President do. It's a big deal.
So what was going to happen? This seemed like it was really going to be a big deal. So people were really speculating: was it going to be a red wedding? I mean, lots of heads going to be lopped off. That was what, and it still may be that, because Hegseth let that open. He said more leadership changes will be made. Of that, I'm certain, but that didn't happen. There was, some people were speculating that they were going to announce we're about to go to war. We weren't sure exactly against whom, but there was that speculation itself. And there was even some speculation, mainly I suppose those of us who worked in Latin America, about this term autogolpe, self-coup, that somehow this was going to be the prelude to they were going to basically declare martial law or something of the sort. None of these things happened. What it turned out was a lecture on personal hygiene. No more beardos. Sorry, Bobby. No more beardos. No more fat generals and admirals. And no more dumbing down physical standards so that women to female standards now for combat. Now, let's keep in mind that the standards for women in combat, physical standards, are the same as the standards for men in combat. So basically, that's all he talked about. I can't imagine what it was like for them all sitting there watching this. I mean, this went on, and he talked about returning to 1990s as the rule of thumb. 1990, in other words, the year before women were allowed to serve in combat roles. I mean, this was an extraordinary performance. And to get all of these people there to do this was sort of beyond belief, but it was the ultimate Hegseth. And I think what it showed more than anything else was his lack of confidence in his own leadership itself, and how incredibly he had nothing to say. There was nothing about what America's role was in the world, nothing about where we were going in the future at a period of time of such turmoil. And this is not what leadership was. He talked about how everyone was going to have to do PT. And then on top of it, I will stop soon, but I'm so absolutely amazed by this whole thing. President Trump comes out and he takes the stage and gives a classic Trump meandering, hyper-partisan stump speech, complaining about Biden and the auto pen. I mean, which I'm sure really was really relevant to this crowd. And then 2/3 of the way through, I mean, this was like more than 70 minutes or something of a speech, there's news. There was news in all of this. He said that he had spoken to Pete Hegseth, to Pete, and that he told him that they should be using American cities, but not all American cities, Democrat-controlled cities, as training grounds for the U.S. military. And that was a strategic statement, and a truly, truly terrifying one. And that was why this was an incredibly important meeting, and to my mind, a really, really frightening one.
Yeah, I think you described it very well, Carla and Bobby. What struck me, I mean, I think we can talk about Hegseth and the fact that he's apparently has never gotten over the fact that as a major he never went anywhere, and the fact that he hasn't learned anything in the 8 months he's been there, because it certainly wasn't. So that's one piece. The other piece is that the training ground, and also this idea that he said at one point, President Trump said at one point, we have been spending trillions and trillions of dollars of protecting the borders of other countries, and now we're going to protect our borders, and link that to the report in yesterday's New York Times about the confidential memorandum sent to Congress, saying that we are in fact at war with drug cartels, which we call terrorist organizations for some legal reason, and that this has now become the focus of the U.S. military, security at home and security of our borders against immigrants who are really, really frightening, and drug traffickers.
But it's not just security at home; it's security against the enemy within.
Right, absolutely. Yes.
Explicitly defined as Democrats. Democrat-run cities. He didn't allude.
No, you're absolutely right.
It was said explicitly.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right.
There were two other really scary elements to the combined speeches of Hegseth and Trump. One was this notion of redefining rules of combat and taking them back to disregard the rules that are put in place in order to protect civilians, in order to prevent atrocities, to prevent war crimes, to put it bluntly. This notion of that this was somehow confining and constraining America's ability, the ability of the American military, and that these shackles were now off. That is very frightening. And
it worked so well in Vietnam, right? I mean,
exactly,
it really worked very well in Vietnam.
Exactly. Yeah. And then the other really scary bit for me, and I've heard variations of that by Middle Eastern dictators and tyrants saying things like that, which is that, and he's addressing those 800 top leaders of the American military, if you don't like it, quit. So it is this way or no way. If you don't like it, get the hell out of here. That was also a very frightening message to me. And I'm trying to imagine, and you with all your experience, Ivo, in NATO, will have a very clear understanding of this. There are many dimensions to this. One is how this goes down in the United States, and Carla sort of got into that a little bit, and you have too. But if you're an American ally anywhere else in the world, how does all this look and sound like? Can you now rely on the American military if you are a member of the NATO alliance, if you are a member of an alliance which is dominated by an army that will no longer observe the rules of war, what does that mean? Can you go into uh, a situation, let's say, heaven forbid, but in Ukraine, where you have to cooperate with the United States military? Can you go into a conflict with the United States military as an ally? I mean, there are cans of worms and cans of worms I mean, there are barrels of worms to be unpacked with this. This is just beyond um, beyond the sort of tragedy comedy of the immediate moment. There is only tragedy, tragedy, tragedy in the sort of foreseeable horizon, and I think, and that's all that those are the outcomes that we can imagine and predict, and there are so many that we can't even see around the corner coming out of this.
No, I think you're right, and Bobby, and in some ways, if you are sitting there as a senior enlisted officer, these people are pretty darn important. They are the people who manage the troop, and you are a senior commander. You've just been told you can take the gloves off, and you have particularly, and these guys have decades of experience, and gals that were there. They know what it was like when the gloves were off, and it wasn't Abu Ghraib was not a fun thing for the army. It was a deeply embarrassing thing for the army. The army, everyone in the army doesn't do this kind of stuff, and so what you are encouraging in some ways is the people who have decades of experience have come to the conclusion that how we fight our wars today is the best way to fight our wars. They're going to leave. The new Air Force Chief of Staff said, "I'm retiring." After the meeting, he said, "Don't." Or the person who was supposed to be Air Force Chief of Staff walked away, and so all the good people with conscience, who don't buy into this, are leaving, and that leaves Pete Hegseth's and JD Vance's as the guys to run our military. And you're right. The allies are well, I mean, the allies are worried that the military won't be there in the first place. But the second is that they will behave in ways that are unconscionable. In fact, that was one of the biggest issues in Afghanistan when I was at NATO, was this issue of how you dealt with detainees. And we dealt with the U.S. military and others dealt with detainees in a slightly different way than the Europeans, who adhere to the rules that we weren't willing to adhere to. So it is a big it's a big issue. I guess, I mean, maybe this is unfair because Carla, but I'll ask it anyway. Where's the outrage? Well, I mean, it's of course, he's flooding the zone. So so in that sense, that is kind of the answer. But this is deeply, deeply stunning, and it's not even on the front page of the New York Times.
Well, I don't know at the time. It's the editorial page. Listen, I'm going to go back to the military. I mean, the only dignity in that room was from the 800 uniforms in that room. And Trump went in and he expected them to cheer. He told them to cheer. He said, "Get loose." He said, he talked about how this was the quietest crowd he'd ever seen. They sat there and they were the ones who were not partisan. They sat there and they were the ones who behaved with dignity. And it was really intriguing because the Washington Post had a story yesterday after this saying that they are now going to impose non-disclosure agreements and polygraphs on everyone who works at the Joint Staff and everyone who works in the Office of the Secretary of Defense. They are not confident in their leadership. They do not trust the military itself. That is not a good thing in a civilian control, for civilian control of the military. Certainly, a lot of these people are saying to themselves, "What the hell is going on? This is not what we signed up for." But I will say, looking at that crowd, the only people with any dignity in the room were the people there in uniform.
I think that's a really, really good way to end. our discussion on this. This was in some ways one of the finest hours of the U.S. military, because it's not about fighting and winning wars. It's about maintaining the standards of what it means to be a superpower military in a democracy, as we're seeing. Bobby Gosh, Carla Robbins, it's great to see you. Everyone else who tuned in, thanks for doing so. We'll be back next week with another edition of World Review on Substack, and we'll be pushing these out as podcasts on your favorite podcast station so you can listen to it as you wake up on Saturday morning and take the dog for a walk, or whatever it is that you do, or wherever you listen to your podcast. But in the meantime, thanks, Bobby, Carla, and thanks everyone else for tuning in. We'll be back again next week. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Ivo.
Thanks.